When I was in that toxic relationship, I felt so much confusion. I had no idea what people were battling in these bad relationships. I mean, I'd seen bad relationships as a psychologist. It was something that commonly brought people in, either as a individual, as a person just looking for help, or as part of a partnership. They would often come in and tell me about the very difficult topics, very difficult issues that they were battling with. But I couldn't imagine the intensity that I would feel when I was in the midst of that toxic relationship. That cognitive dissonance, chronic and traumatizing cognitive dissonance, was a key piece of what kept me stuck. This is a key piece of what the trauma bond builds on, that victims that really keep victims trapped in these pathological love relationships. Today I want to break it down, talk about what is cognitive dissonance, why is it so effective in keeping you from being able to make a decision about your relationship. I want to also talk about the traps of thinking that we fall into and why we think that way, but then also give you an alternative way to think of the same problems so that you can get out of the mental loop, the maze that you feel like you're in when you're in this one of these relationships. So I'm really glad that you're here with me today. I hope you had, for those of you in the United States, a great holiday weekend that you're wrapping up. And I know today probably is your first day back to work, but I'm really glad you're joining me today because this is such a very important topic. This is the cornerstone of trauma bonding. It is what happens in our mental state, what happens neurologically. And by the way, it's doing neurological damage to you when you're in these relationships and you can't make a decision and you keep looping around and spiraling when you're in something like this. It actually damages you neurologically. It is causing damage to the executive functioning, which is why you're feeling forgetful, you're struggling to sleep, you're feeling distracted, you feel like you're functioning less you're not at your par and you don't know why. But it also is making you jumpy. It's making you struggle to relax, which also has ramifications when it comes to your sleep, you being able to move into a calm state. It's keeping you on pins and needles. So that feeling of that fuzziness, it's real. It's neurologically based. But we're going to get all into the nitty-gritty of cognitive dissonance today, why you feel trapped and confused in that relationship. So, and we're also going to talk about, here's another key piece, is a lot of you want to know, is this intentional? Is the narcissist doing this to you intentionally? Do they know? Are they masterful at this kind of psychological warfare? I'm going to answer that question too. So I hope you stick around to find out whether or not it's an intentional thing and also the traps you're falling into and how to get out of the traps. So be sure to share this live today. You may know someone right now who's battling cognitive dissonance. Maybe they don't put it in that words. Maybe they're saying, I just don't know what to do. And I make a decision and then I change my mind and I debate whether or not this is really the right decision. And what if I'm wrong and I'm afraid to make the wrong decision? And you know how this person is. The minute I do that, if you know somebody who's sounding like that, then this is sign of cognitive dissonance. This may be exactly the live that they need to be attending today. I hope you'll invite them to join us. And be sure to like and share this. I really would love to get the words out because breaking a trauma bond is not just going no contact. It's a mental game that starts first in your head. It starts first in your head. So let's first dive into what is cognitive dissonance, which I often say wrong and say dissidence. No, it's dissonance. What if you pull it apart? Cognitive means thinking. It has to do with your thought life, how you view and contemplate and problem solve. Um, Dissonance means a discordance. There's something that's not aligning, that's actually uneasy. It's out of alignment. It's causing, imagine two tones that don't belong together and create this terrible sound. That's what's happening mentally when you're in a toxic relationship with a narcissist, a psychopath, or someone with a cluster B personality disorder. But it also happens with some people who has emotionally immature personalities as well. So so what happens is that this becomes psychological quicksand. This person has given you very conflicting information. They justify what they're doing to you as evidence of their woundedness, or they say that that's because they can't help themselves or how much they love you. They'll also talk about the fact that they have had a terrible past relationships or a bad childhood. They'll give you some sob story as a way to place the weird messaging, the weird behaviors you're seeing, and make it make sense. And because you remember the good moments that you had with them when things were really good during that early stage, which you didn't know that was actually part of the love bombing, when you didn't actually meet a real person, you thought you did. But because of that, you end up thinking, oh, they're vulnerable. They're being transparent with me. They need my help. That's what I thought. When I heard, I remember when I found out that my ex was cheating on the last night of a delayed honeymoon. He said to me, I told my ex-wives that I'd had this addiction to intimacy, to physical addiction, and I tried to get help, but they just laughed at me. Well, as a psychologist, those are really hard words to hear. The last person I want, somebody who's trying to seek help, to feel laughed at or feel unsupported. Little did I know that this was a completely contrived excuse that just was meant to hook me and lead me into staying longer instead of walking out on him that day, which it did. And in fact, it hooked me so efficiently that I stayed for 2 more years. So they'll do these things that, even though they're very cruel and they do these massive betrayals, they'll put it in some kind of a frame that makes you feel very sympathetic towards them. And that frame also then becomes sort of like an anchoring point. It's a way for them, anytime something goes bad, they'll go back to that frame and say, I didn't have a good childhood, or that I've never had a decent relationship, or what my ex-wife was like, or my past girlfriend was like. And that frame then, because in your mind, you're picturing all this horrible stuff, you don't actually know what happened. Chances are what they're telling you isn't anywhere near the truth. But because they've set it in this anchor, then you go back to that and you think, well, maybe I'm being unfair and holding them to this standard. Maybe I need to understand that they're more fragile than me. They're counting on that. That's what they hope, because then that keeps you stuck in this relationship. So even though it's unhealthy, you can't imagine harming this person because you're a very tender-hearted person, but also because they're at the same time, they've been giving you enough intermittent reinforcement that makes you afraid this relationship is vulnerable, that you might lose them. You somehow instinctively know this person's not somebody to mess around with, to jeopardize. And so you feel this kind of this cautiousness in taking any stand. And because of that, you start to fear losing it. And they also, because of love bombing, which wasn't real or based on the actual person, was so over the top because it mimicked you. And we all have this secret wish of meeting ourselves, that you can't imagine life losing that initial wonderful period of time that you had with this individual. So instead of you resolving the confusion by confronting the truth or taking action that was protective of you, you change the interpretation of the abuse. You'll say to yourself something like, well, I don't think they really meant it. Or, everybody has a bad day, or everybody has flaws. Or maybe if we just worked harder at this, or I tried harder, maybe I was more understanding, then we'll get back on good feet, on the good times again. In fact, it was interesting when I found out how bad it was with my ex, and that I started learning just the depth of his betrayals, that it wasn't just one person. This was a guy who had lived a second double life that was very deceptive. He then started to say to me, don't you wish it was like when we first were married? And that was sort of an idyllic period, with this brief period when we first moved to Mexico. We laughed a few times, and we went up to the roof and watched the stars, saw falling stars, shooting stars. And he would say, wasn't that really wonderful? Don't you wish it was just like that? And that would hook me and get me back into the nostalgia. That's called euphoric recall. I would start to get hooked into this idea that those days were possible, that this person was invested, that if I just worked harder, that if we tried harder, maybe that we get to those good times again. And it keeps you so trapped in these toxic relationships. I'm so excited you're here. For those of you who don't know who I am, I'm Dr. Carrie McAvoy. I am a clinical psychologist with over 25 years of counseling practice. I've worked in all sorts of settings in inpatient. I've been in forms of hospitalizations. I've also been an outpatient, and I've worked in private practice. And I hate to say, though, during those days, this was before my days of abuse. I had no idea when I had somebody in the office who was married to somebody, and I recognize narcissism. I was happened to go to a graduate school that was sort of in an advancement in its training clinicians in personality disorders. So I was very familiar with that. But what I didn't know, what they still don't talk about, is that these relationships are damaging not just the person who suffers with them, but these personalities are damaging not just to the person who suffers from the disorder, but also for those who are living in a relationship with them, that it actually has ramifications for those around them, because these disorders are highly defensive. They're highly because of the way that they're constructed, they have this arrogance and just this entitlement and privilege that they'll do a lot of bizarre things to protect their ego. And the sort of the backlash of that protection is the damage it does to you. In order to protect their ego, whatever they do wrong, and they do a lot of things wrong because they have poor impulse control, they're not empathic, they don't plan well, they don't have a good use of time, they have all sorts of executive functioning problems. But they, instead of them looking at it and using it as a learning experience, they offload all that damage to you. They make it you. You're the problem, not them. But if you look at their life, they go from one bad relationship to the next, and it's always the other person. I remember when I met my ex, I was his fifth wife. I know, even that is like ick. I should have like ran when I heard that. But when he tell his reasons are quite shallow, and they don't have a lot of depth. But he then said something to me that kind of fooled me. He said, I'm realizing that I just haven't interviewed people very well. I interview people for jobs and do quite well at that I need to apply what I do with my job and do the same thing when it comes to romance. And I thought, oh, okay, there's a little bit of depth there. But you know what? Again, he told me that because he knew I would want to hear that, because he knew as a psychologist and I'd want some blame. And so he rolled out this idea that he just wasn't interviewing well. Now I know the whole thing was a setup, that this guy had basically married me because I was a widow and I had life insurance. So I don't want this to happen to you. And I know that when you get into these toxic relationships, it's very easy to get very confused. I got to interview Sandra L. Brown, who wrote the book, The Women Who Love Psychopaths. And she said off camera that when they speak, you get mesmerized. So I want you to know that what's happening to you in these relationships, the confusion you're feeling, is because of how very effective they are at the ability to mesmerize you, almost spellbound you, to hold you captive. I would say they're almost using post-hypnotic suggestions. They're very good at neurolinguistics without even having been trained in it. So how does actually cognitive dissonance get created, especially when the relationship starts out so great? Well, the love bombing is what anchors it in the beginning. It gives you this frame of this is a really great relationship. And so you hold on to that frame thinking that it's achievable. If it happened once, it'll happen again. But so then when the abuse starts to happen, it usually is rolled out in a very subtle way, often in a positive direction. Like, they don't say, boy, you're really bad at putting furniture together. They're more likely to say something like, have you read the instructions? Because it often goes wrong when you don't read the instructions. And then when you admit that you didn't, they'll say, and then something goes wrong. They'll say, see, I told you, you should read the instructions. So you don't recognize it, but that's sort of you're an adult talking to another adult. That's not very respectful behavior. You don't need someone to come in as your mentor when you're in a relationship. You're really looking for someone that sees you as an equal, but you don't recognize that this is actually kind of patronizing. It's a one down way of seeing things. But so you minimize it and you end up thinking, oh, that's not that bad, and you don't really see the blame shifting. You just kind of like, you're also like glowy eyed, rosy colored glasses at that stage. You overlook a lot of things that maybe are little warning signs, but you just don't see them that way. But then you start to get just enough picture that you start to see something's wrong. Maybe there's this massive discovery. I know a lot of us have experienced, some kind of blowout, like you catch them in a deception. You find out they've forged something, or they're in trouble at work, or you find out that they're cheating. There's usually this massive discovery that happens that tells you this person's not who you think that they are. And yet they act kind around it. One of the things that happened the night of that I found out he'd been cheating, I'm devastated. I don't know what to do. I don't know who I should tell. I'm just absolutely undone. And that night we'd gotten home from the honeymoon, and I'm trying to figure out, we're selling our house. It's been sold. I'm having to move out. The car has been being sold, and we don't even, it's devastating. And I'm really literally don't have a game plan, and I always have a game plan. And I remember just feeling crushed. And I get into bed next to this guy, and he actually pulls me in close, kind of tucks me into himself. And I'm thinking, I don't even know if I like you. I certainly don't want you touching me, but I don't know how I feel about you. But here he is showing this kindness after being called out. Instead of him acting kind of hurt or shocked or quiet, he's pulling me close and acting warm and kind of cuddly. And I remember I thought, I don't want this, but I also knew enough this guy was dangerous enough that I didn't want to tip him off that I was feeling that upset. So I waited till he fell asleep, and then I pulled away just because I didn't dare want to antagonize him. But maybe for you saw some, gift or vulnerability or maybe some affection, and that then pulls you back to that anchor. It makes you think, oh, those good days are possible. This person's invested. I know they're invested. Look at how hard they're working. Look at what they say. They just give you enough of the information for you to feel like they really care for you. They're really invested. But then they're continuing to gaslight you, and the criticism is increasing and worsening. So now it starts to kind of actually warp your sense of recollection of events. And they're suggesting that you're overreacting, you're being too sensitive. Again, think of my story. Here I am reeling, and I'm still uncovering things. I'm still finding out this person doesn't just have one relationship. I'm finding out there's been other relationships. And I'm finding out the absences that I've been experiencing during engagement was actually not real absences. He was meeting up with somebody on trips. And I already could feel that I didn't dare have an emotional reaction, that I didn't dare get upset. And that if I was, he would call me out as sort of being one of those women, one of those angry, bitter, controlling women. And, should I have been controlled by that? Absolutely not. I shouldn't have been. But on the other hand, it feels uncomfortable to have someone, especially somebody that you love deeply, accuse you of those things, so that you start to find yourself trying not to be that way. In fact, what Gavin de Becker in the book, The Gift of Fear, calls this typecasting. What they'll do is they'll call out the kind of person they don't want you to be, and then ask you if you're being that. And then because it's so unpleasant, it's sort of like negging, why negging works. You start to naturally work against it. You end up becoming the opposite of it in order not to fulfill it. It's almost like they're trying to use like self-fulfilling prophecy, only it's not self-fulfilling. It's fulfilling prophecy, but you then, because of that feeling so ugly, you work against it. But what they're doing during this whole time is they're intertwining fear with hope. They use the threats with the promises of a better future. If you could just work on it, or you two would work on it. And you start to hold these two conflicting realities. They hurt me, but they also can save me. They love me, but they also seem to hate me. They harm me, but they say they love me. And you start to feel that these two realities are existing. And what Sandra Brown said is that you actually start to build a reality around both. You develop a self that knows how to live with the love side, and you also build with a self that starts to learn how to cope with the bad side. You are literally living with Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. And you inside, just like they are split, there's two sides of them. Really, the Mr. Hyde's the real self, but you think like the TV show, movie, book, he's the fake self. No, he's not. He's the real self. You just didn't know that. You just didn't get to meet him until now. But you learn to cope with Mr. Hyde, but you're also learning to cope with Dr. Jekyll. You'd like to have more of Dr. Jekyll, and you're working really hard to get him back. But you in yourself become split between these dual realities, the good and the bad, and it gets you super confused. And as a result, the brain then, because it can't bear this indecisiveness, and it can't bear what seems to be true, but maybe not true, starts to then just not make any decision. I had the this is how I dealt with it. And now I look back and I think this doesn't make sense, but I felt like if I made no decision, like the decision, is this relationship's a good relationship or not? Or the decision, do I know him or do I not know him? And the decision, should I leave or not leave? These are the big decisions I was trying to make. And because I couldn't figure out the truth, I would literally it's almost like I had two jars in front of me and I would drop in whatever seemed to validate both truths. He loves me, he's working on this relationship. He doesn't love me, this relationship's a sham and this is awful and bad and I need to get out. And I would literally drop in like little tokens that would support whatever seemed to happen. It was as if every day I was tallying up which of these two jars got fed the most, which of them came out higher. And then based on that, I would try to take action. So if I felt like it really seems he's leaving, this is bad and I'm not doing well, I would start to take steps in that direction. But then the minute it started to move in the other direction, I'm like, oh, I got it wrong. And I would start to take directions in the directions of saving us. And I literally was back, forth, back, forth, back, forth. It felt like I was up on top of a fence, looking down at both options and thought if long as I stayed up on top of the fence, standing, straddling it, then I wasn't making any decision at all. But I want you to hear me. That's actually not true. You not making a decision is making a decision. The decision is you're staying. Status quo. It's a decision to status quo. That's a decision to stay. So don't think that because you think you're not making a decision, that you're not making a decision. You are actually making a decision, and it's to stay. Okay, so let's jump into, do the perpetrators know they're creating cognitive dissonance? I know that I've said that they do, and I'm going to tell you why and how we know that they do. There are actually 3 classes of perpetrators in this group. Okay. And I'm going to give you a quiz to help you figure out which your group is. Which one is your group? So right now, maybe you know someone who needs to hear this. I really strongly suggest you invite them so that they hear these 3 categories and then they get to take the quiz to figure out which their guy or their woman fits. Because some know, some don't really know, and some are accidental. So if you have somebody that you know needs to hear this, please be sure to share this. Okay, let's first off talk about the unaware but learned pattern person. Okay, this is a person who's been raised in a chaotic and abusive home, and they have learned to recreate those dynamics without a lot of self-reflection. Because in those homes, there's no self-reflection. Everybody's impulsive. They're just acting out. And how you notice this, you'll see that they unconsciously mix care and cruelty because they've experienced that growing up. And they don't really notice that this is an emotional whiplash. And if you confront them, they minimize it. They say it's not that big of a deal. And you can tell that their awareness is low because they're not deliberately trying to bind you, but the impact is still as damaging. So that's the unaware but repeating learned pattern. This is what I would call the cycle perpetrator. The next group is a semi-aware, and they're very self-serving. This is what I'm going to call the emotionally immature, self-absorbed perpetrator. This is people who have poor empathy. They're highly insecure, or they have a cluster B traits. They don't have to have a cluster B disorder, but cluster B traits. And they may not have consciously studied any manipulation tactics. They happen just to be kind of good at it. They notice that after they mistreat you, that if they smooth things over with you and are temporarily affectionate, it tends to get better. They've also learned, maybe from past relationships or this relationship, that doing this cycle of smoothing things over after a bad bout keeps partners from leaving. And they will justify all of this as just part of a normal relationship with its, ordinary up and down. So again, that's the emotionally immature or the self-absorbed perpetrator. And then you have the high manipulators or the real predators. These are the narcissists, psychopaths, con artists, and other predators who have control tactics and motives. They intentionally mix cruelty with kindness in order to destabilize you. And they know keeping you confused makes you a whole lot easier to control. And they'll even time their affection and apologies in order to stop you from leaving. Their awareness level is high. They know exactly what they're doing. And although they wouldn't call it creating cognitive dissonance, they know it's creating confusion, and that's intentional. Okay, so which is your person? Are they are they the lowest one, a cycle perpetrator? Are they emotionally immature and self-absorbed? Or are they a high manipulator and a predator? Okay, so here's some questions to ask yourself. I want you to notice, um, I want you to kind of look at these questions. All right. Do they seem to invest? Let me make sure I understand this correctly before I do it. Um, here's a 2-question test that you can use to test this out. Here's the 2 questions. Number 1, they seem invested in clarifying misunderstandings or in keeping me off balance. Do they seem invested in clarifying misunderstandings or in keeping me off balance? That's the first question. And number 2, when I try to address the harmful patterns, do things improve, stay the same, or get worse? So, if you're answered mostly like number 1 with keeping you off balance, and number 2 it gets worse, you're probably dealing with intentional manipulation rather than just a learned dysfunction. So again, notice, are they trying to deliberately keep you off balance, and does it tend to get worse? Then you're likely to be dealing with intentional manipulation. So, the problem with some people is that they just get good with practice. Some people stumble into this because they're very predatory and, and combative and competitive. And they learn that the way to keep people in line is to keep them in control. Interestingly enough, just before I just recently watched Mean Girls, which the young girl played by Lindsay Lohan figures out that if she does this and this and that, then she can keep everybody kind of in line and off balance. That is a person who is learning to manipulate, and she kind of stumbled into it. So I would say she's actually becoming quite intentionally manipulative. Now, that's not a real story because she redeemed her personality again at the end, which if somebody was really doing that and enjoy doing it, then they wouldn't be redeemable probably. But there's other people who kind of, because it's what they grew up with, because it's what worked in their other relationships or at home with other toxic people, they then learn to do this as a way to then continue that pattern because it's what they know and because it really works. So note, kind of see this as a continuum from those who sort of step into it backwards all the ways to those who are very intentionally manipulative. Here's how I knew mine was intentional. My guy was very, very sophisticated at it. One of the moments that was probably the most dangerous moment that I was personally in, and I felt it. I felt terribly afraid. He also was threatening to leave me that day. He'd handed me all the credit cards to their company. And I was just on pins and needles was when we had the second polygraph. And one of the questions was, did you marry Carrie for the money? And they told him ahead of time. So he's prepared for the question. Why? I'll never understand that. But while we were waiting for the examiner to get ready to take him back for the polygraph, he was so enraged that he was absolutely silent. You know, one of those silences you could literally cut. It was so terrible. And I was just so afraid. And I had to go home with this guy, fly home with this guy. And I have never felt more in jeopardy than I did in that moment, that this whole treatment program had set me up possibly for terrible situation. And so he handed me back the credit cards. He went and did the polygraph, and then we were waiting for the results, which, by the way, I now suspect this guy knew how to fool them. First time he took one, he actually wept, and I think was a weep in relief that he passed because he shouldn't have been passing. The second one, of course, he passed as well, and then he was absolutely silent. We got back in the car, and I didn't know what to do. I was just terrified. And then he said to me, I suspect that how I'm feeling right now is how I've been making you feel in this relationship. Now, this guy had no empathy for me. He was predatory. This marriage was a con. He'd married me for money. That question was a real question, and he'd answered it falsely and got away with it. And I found out at the end of the marriage when I intercepted a text that confirmed this whole thing had been about the money. So he then tells me this really thoughtful kind of introspective question of somebody who has no insight into himself and no empathy for me. And he's actually really very, very dangerous person. I felt so blown away by that thoughtfulness that I broke into tears and we reconnected. And I thought, oh, maybe he gets it. It was that effective. He had timed it. He had waited till right at the right feverish pitch. He said this incredibly thoughtful comment and it worked. So be careful with somebody who seems to be very intentional and very good at targeting and timing their statements. You may have met somebody who's extremely dangerous, who's intentionally manipulating you. Now, does knowing the intentionality of the perpetrator matter? I want to really get into that because we spend a lot of time as victims, and sometimes this obsessing over the partner, the predator person's personality can actually work against us. It can actually keep you obsessed about them. But here's why this matters, because intentional manipulators want control and it will escalate. The threat will escalate when they're threatened. So they're very good at using retaliation, smear campaigns, financial abuse, and sabotage if you try to leave. Whereas a learned dysfunction, it it's more reactive instead of calculating, and the retaliatory risk is lower because they're more defensive and there's a chaotic reaction. With intentional manipulators, the capacity to change is nil. It rarely happens, and if so, it's only short-lived and it's usually used as bait to reestablish control. But if you're with somebody who has a learned dysfunction, they can change if there's a willingness to take responsibility and do sustained work, like sustained therapy and learning self-regulation skills over a long period of time. So improvements can happen, but it still requires good boundaries and a lot of self-protection. And if you're trying to figure out what your path forward is, an intentional manipulator, the safest, most effective option is usually complete disengagement or exit. You need to get out emotionally or get out physically. And the recovery, often then you have to work on breaking that trauma bond and reestablishing your autonomy. Whereas with a learned dysfunctional person, you may just need more space to set boundaries, see if change is possible. And the recovery time may be different because of just because the intensity was different. So regardless of the type, you're still going to have to still restore self-trust. You're still going to have to figure out what's true, break the confusion, and you're still going to have to work on learning healthy from unhealthiness as you rebuild your support network. But the bottom line with an intentional manipulator is they are programming you. They're using deliberate conditioning as a way to get into your mind and make you susceptible to their tactics. Here's another thing, and I often don't talk about it. I had got into this buying spree of real estate. I don't really know why. It was sort of a crazy thing that I was doing at the time. And I had run out of the life insurance money and was coming up to the retirement money, and which would have then had penalties if I had withdrawn. But I found a new property I really liked. And my ex started to make drop statements of like, he had no money, by the way, and he had contributed to nothing of these purchases, not $1. Although when we started to separate, he expected he was going to get half of everything I put in there. So he either was going to do away with me or get half when he divorced me was his plan. So, and if you want to know more about that, I have talked about what was happening, that I was super sick and yeah, it was scary sick, probably because I was ingesting something I shouldn't have been that was being introduced into my diet. But so here I am thinking about, rating the retirement fund for this new property. And he would say things like, well, I wouldn't let somebody set the rules, tell me what I could and couldn't buy, or you really deserve that. That I can see you in there. You'd be so happy. Just these little like drops out there to sort of like tease me into that direction. And here, interestingly enough, at that time, I started to hear something speak to me. I mean, I was getting kind of you can call it supernatural messaging. And one of them was, if you move there, it's a remote place. Nobody lives there, and you're going to disappear and no one will know that you disappear. Don't do that. And I kept hearing that over and over. Don't do this. You're going to be really at risk. And it was a remote place that had not been completely sold out, had a lot of empty condos, and it was beautiful and great location, but I had no support system up there. See, it was greater isolation, not only like literal isolation, but it was not only like support from friendships would have been an hour and a half away, but it was literal isolation. I was going to be in a lot of risk up there. And I started feeling that it really started to scare me. So I know I talked about the fact that I was going to talk about the 8 stages, and I also know I've gone long and I want to get to the next part. So I'm going to rush through this part just so that you have the 8 stages of a cognitive dissonance, the development of it. The first is idealization and belief building. That's stage 1. And that's when what's happening during the love bombing. It kind of coincides with the trauma bonding of idealization as well. The second stage is the first stage of harm. They start to show you some unkindness or control or dishonesty, but they downplay it and as a misunderstanding. And you explain it away. Then the stage 3 is there's conflicting realities. You're holding the opposing truths. They hurt me and they love me. They're both the person who comforts me, but they're person who harms me. You start to hold these conflicting truths. And because that your mind can't compute it, it seeks relief. So you start to justify the harm in order to keep the relationship intact. Stage 4 is the gaslighting and reality distortion, when they start to actually deny events, question your memory, suggest that maybe you're too sensitive. And then stage 5 is their intermittent reinforcement, that they keep then interjecting kindness or understanding right after cruelty, making the good moments feel more powerful than the bad moments. Just like the example I gave after that polygraph. That moment anchored me again and pulled me back into thinking that we're going to be okay. Stage 6 is the erosion of self-trust. You start to feel less certain about your own feelings, about your instincts. You stop trusting yourself in your decision making, and you start to defer. Here's the extra dangerous part. You start to defer to their version of reality because you doubt yourself so severely, making you increasingly powerless and giving them greater control. Stage 7 is you rationalize the bond because you see the harm, but you frame it as love, passion, or part of that special connection. I've heard people say, well, people just don't understand how crazy in love we are. And I'm thinking, no, that sounds crazy, hurtful, crazy bad. And leaving starts to just feel wrong, like a betrayal of a deep bond. And then stage 8 is breaking the loop, when you start to recognize that it's a cycle in real time, but that you're emotionally hooked. This actually is the turning point. And if you can hold on to that truth long enough, see, we start to like loop through these. If you can hold on to the truth long enough that there is a cycle to this whole pattern, then you can start to break free. So I want to help you figure out which stage you're trapped in. So I'm going to ask you questions and of each stage, and then notice which of the stages you're answering more yeses than nos, because that's going to tell you what stage of the the cognitive dissonance you're in. And then we're going to quickly jump into what confusing things we think that make it worse and what you should do instead. And then we'll start to take your questions. So here are the questions to figure out which stage you're in. Stage 1. If you answer majority, like 2 or 3 yeses here, then you're trapped in stage 1. Stage 1 is if you still think back to the perfect version of this person from early in the relationship. Do you still think back to that? That's question 1. Question 2, do you still believe that they understand and love you more than anyone else could? Question 3, does remembering their early days make you doubt your decision to set a boundary or to leave? That's stage 1. Okay, stage 2, if you answer a majority of yeses here, then you're trapped in stage 2. Stage 2 is the first sign of harm. Have you noticed patterns of unkindness or control but told yourself they're just bad days? And the second question is, do you make excuses for their harmful or hurtful behavior as due to stress, trauma, bad childhood, instead of holding them accountable? If you say yes to 1 or 2 of these, and there are only 2 of them, you're probably struggling with the first sign of harm. Stage 3, conflicting reality. Nicholas, there's only 2 questions here as well. Do you find yourself thinking they hurt me, but they love me, and you're struggling to reconcile the 2 of them, that they hurt you and love you? Number 7, do you feel mentally and emotionally drained from constantly weighing the good moments against the bad ones? Boy, I stayed forever in stage 3. It was awful. Stage 4 is the gaslighting and reality distortion. There's 3 questions here. Do they tell you events didn't happen the way that you remember? Number 9, are you starting to wonder if you're too sensitive or overreacting? And number 10, are you second guessing your memory or perception now more than you ever have in this relationship? That's stage 4, which is gaslighting and reality distortion. Stage 5, intermittent reinforcement. These 2 questions. Number 11, after a period of tension or hurt, do you feel euphoric, like they're suddenly kind again? And number 12, okay, let me rephrase that because I said that wrong. After a period of tension or hurt, do you feel euphoric when they suddenly are kind again? Number 12, do you believe these good moments mean things are improving only to see the hurtful patterns again return? Oh, jeez, that nails me too. I was really stuck at stage 5 for a long time. Stage 6, an erosion of self-trust. There's 3 questions. Number 13, do you rely on them to tell you what's true or how you should feel? Number 14, do you struggle to make even small decisions without worrying about their reaction? Number 15, do you feel less confident in your instincts and judgment than you did just before the relationship? Let me rephrase that again. Do you feel less confident in your instincts and judgment than you did before this relationship? That's stage 6, erosion of self-trust. Stage 7, you're rationalizing the bond. Number 16, do you describe their behavior in softened terms like they just get frustrated instead of saying they yell and belittle me? Number 17, do you tell yourself this relationship is special or different even when other people express concern? Number 18, do you imagine a future together when things were better despite repeated harmful cycles? That is stage 7 when you're rationalizing the bond. Stage 8 is when you're trying to break the loop and you have a moment of time when you can actually lean into it. Number 19, do you recognize the pattern but still feel emotionally pulled back when they show kindness? And number 20, do you fear you'll never find another connection as intense as this one, even though it's painful? Oof, man, I was in stage 8 a lot too. Okay, so notice where you're saying yes to. That's telling you where your spots of conflict are. So if you're struggling with this, I want to bring up the fact that I have a relationship reset workshop starting 2 weeks from now. It's the 16th. Yeah, it's literally 2 weeks from today. It's 2 spots left. It's $295. I offer installment payments, and we work on this biggest problem. We give you each week dedicated time to help you figure out what's going wrong so that you can find your voice again and figure out your actions in a safe spot. You get weekly prompts. You join a small community of other women. You also get get direct time with me and my therapeutic interpretations. You also get a transcript of the event so you can look at what happened and take notes on it. But if you're looking for very specialized, focused attention, there's 2 spots left. The relationship reset starts September 16th. Okay, so here's some common mistakes victims make while trying to solve the confusion. I'm going to tell you what you should do instead. Okay. The first mistake is we wait for more good moments. We start to believe that when they're loving or kind or there's this nostalgic interaction, that somehow it's outweighing the bad and it's better than the confusion. But what we don't realize is this is because of the intermittent reinforcement. It's breadcrumbing, as a lot of you have already mentioned, and it strengthens the link between you and your abuser. It strengthens the link that they provide the relief from the abuse that they give. So instead of waiting for more good moments, I want you to start tracking the patterns, not the moments. I want you to chart the full cycle so you can see how the good behavior is it consistent or is it just a reset from the last harmful moment? For example, I picked up that my ex would have a really great day with me on Sunday. We'd go out to lunch and then he'd take me shopping with my credit card. But it was a really nice afternoon. And then I started to notice my hands were shaking when we would do this because he usually had stormed out either Friday or Saturday night to be gone most of the night. And this was the makeup to get us on a good foot for the start of the week so that we would start off on a better note and undo whatever damage he did to hurt me on that weekend that I didn't know about because he was probably cheating. So track the pattern. Don't lean into the experience. Second mistake we make, we end up trying to chase closure from the abuser. We keep thinking that if we can just get them to admit the truth or apologize or explain that the confusion will go away. But you know what? They're never honest and there's no consistency. They're going to just keep you hooked and doubting yourself. They're not going to give you the thing that, first of all, they're not going to give you accountability. I mean, come on. They're just going to keep you confused. So don't think that some admission or some discovery or some apology is going to set you free. You give yourself the closure by naming the truth and validating the experience. You don't need their agreement to tell you this is bad. You know this is bad. Here's number 3. We overanalyze their motives. We spend hours trying to understand why they hurt us and what they're thinking. I'll tell you guys, I read so many books on sex addiction when I was in that relationship, trying to make sense of this behavior. What happens is you're shifting the focus of the impact from you to their inner world, which keeps you in a reactive, dependent position. It doesn't set you free. Understanding them doesn't set you free, and it doesn't stop the behavior. So instead of trying to focus on why they understand why they hurt you and understand how their behavior affects you and whether or not it aligns with your values and takes care of you with your safety needs. Focus on how it affects you. Number 4, we keep waiting for them to change. We keep mistaking that and with enough time or love or patience or just the right kind of therapy, they're going to become a better person. But this delays actions and increases and prolongs your exposure to harm, and it gives the trauma bond time to deepen. So instead of doing that, don't instead judge the relationship by its current reality. If nothing is changing, even regardless of all the efforts, then it's not likely to change at all. My ex was reading books, underlining them, talking to me about it, going to therapy, seeing couples therapy, and none of it changed. He was never, all of his tactics never changed. He never slowed down. He just got better at fooling all of us. Don't think that if there's no consistent difference in this person, they're going to change. They're just manipulating you. Okay, number 5. We end up minimizing the harm. We tell ourselves it's not that bad, and we compare it to worse situations in order to justify staying. It backfires because it erodes your boundaries and normalizes mistreatment, making the dissonance that you're feeling, that ill ease, off feeling that you have inside, less urgent to resolve. So instead of doing that, I want you not to compare their behavior to someone that's bad or worse, or who has it worse than you. I want you to compare the behavior to someone who has it better than you. It maybe compare it to what you'd want for your best friend or for one of your kids. And think about, is this okay for them? Would you want them in this relationship? I'll tell you, that's what got me out. I literally thought, would I want this for my kids? Would I think this is a good partner? No, and not at all. And then I started to ask myself, then why is it acceptable for me? What makes me super special or super tough that I can put up with a lack of love and care and compassion, and yet I would never want that for one of my kids? Number 6, I want you to stop seeking validation from the abuser. What we often do is we hope the same person who hurts us will somehow eventually affirm the truth and admit that they're doing what they're doing. But what happens with this is it gives them more opportunity to gaslight you or to deny the event or spin it in some way that deepens your confusion. So instead, I want you to start finding validation from safe, abuse-aware people who do not have an invested interest in keeping you confused. And if you're really struggling to find one, consider joining the Toxic Free Relationship Club. We'd love to have you. We do a lot of affirmation and validation in that membership. Somebody just today said that wasn't for the group, she wouldn't have been able to step away and go no contact, but she finally has been able to break free. If you're struggling to do that, then I really would love to have you become a part of our community. Here's number 7, trying to communicate better with someone who thrives on miscommunication. Believing that somehow you can just, if you could word it right, they'll get it, they'll understand it. What you're doing is you're really dealing with a skilled manipulator who knows how to twist the meaning of things. And they're going to make you doubt anything that you try to say. They're going to twist it around so well that you're never going to work your way out of that maze. So instead of trying to communicate better with them, notice how they twist or avoid every attempt that you make at getting a better communication resolution. Notice the unwillingness that this is not a wording problem that you're having. This is somebody who doesn't want to have you be able to set boundaries and communicate clearly or to resolve difficulties. And number 8, this is you're ignoring your body warning. You're dismissing that tight chest. For me, my jaw just ached. I would rub my jaw constantly. You're ignoring the stomach knots, the GI distress, the headaches, the anxiety spikes, the overreaction. You're overriding them because you don't know how to take a step and you're really scared to take a step. But instead of doing that, I want you to treat these physical reactions as data. They're telling you that you're in danger. And before you start to dismiss it, really listen to that and consider getting help in order to help you to take it more seriously. Whew. All right, guys, this was a big one. This was a really tough conversation that we had today. I know for me, this was what kept me trapped in that relationship for a very long time. So I have just given you a handbook on how to do this. If you would like to work on a workbook, first steps to leaving, I actually have an online course that you can work through at your own pace and work at your own pace and sort of sort this through, kind of get into your head and figure out how you see. So if you're needing some help and you want to slow it down, it has also an optional workbook. It's priced reasonably so that you can afford it. It's actually under $30. And just go to my website to find the book. It's called First Steps to Leaving. I'd love to be able to help you break the confusion. And also be sure to check out this week's podcast. It's my favorite clips on cognitive dissonance. Because it was something I battled so severely, I was in pain. I was in physical pain from the confusion. And I didn't know it was also causing neurological damage. I didn't talk about that. Let me jump into that real quick. It is shrinking your hippocampus, which is in the center of your brain, which has to do with memory and executive functioning. And it's enlarging the amygdala. They've actually studied it, seen it. They've seen it, it shows up on scans. Your amygdala is swelling, and that has to do with your fight or flight because you're frequently scared and feeling out of control. You're becoming hyper vigilant, and you're on constant threat. So it's actually doing damage. And the big question people ask me is, will it heal? Will it go back to normal? I don't know if they've done those studies yet, but my suspicion is if you're out long enough in a calm enough environment, really focus on a different kind of mindset, that some of that can change. I don't know if all of it will change. Some things get permanent, but I do think you can. I'm still pretty distractible. I still struggle to read a book. I used to be a massive reader. Reading for me these days is harder. But I am sleeping better. It took me a long time to start to really sleep deeply. But I hate to tell you how many years. It took years for me to sleep more deeply. But I do believe that it is possible to start to do better if you're out long enough. But you got to get out and get away from all the drama. And I know not all of us are able to do that because of the post-separation abuse. I understand that. This talk has been posted elsewhere. It is permanently on YouTube, and it will be temporarily for a month or two on Facebook. But you can find it on both YouTube and Facebook, same handle everywhere. All right, if you've noticed, guys, I've been wearing glasses, and that is because I lost a contact, which actually was a blessing in disguise. I found out some medication I was on was causing hemorrhaging in one of my eyes. So that was good news that I found that out, and I could stop it so I could heal. But I'm having a hard time reading TikTok's comments. So if I can't see your comment, please know that it's because these glasses that I'm in for a few more days is less than perfect. I can, however, see what's happening on YouTube and Facebook. So right now, let's turn it over to you for about 8 minutes. It's going to be short. Oh, I want to tell you about next week. Next week, we're going to be talking about how to win in court. So if you're battling a narcissist, I am featuring former associate judge Michelle Locke. She now has a podcast called Love, Lust, Law, fabulous podcast, where she breaks down as a former judge and a family law specialist. She's an attorney. She's actually a practicing attorney. And I also have her on next week. We'll really get into the details of what happens as a judge in the room with these really high conflict cases. So it's fascinating. I hope you guys will join me. We'll also talk about all of this on the live. We'll follow that up on Tuesday with a live. So questions for me. So Jules said, I barely leave my house because I think he's always watching me. Jules, are you still in a relationship with him or are you out? One of the things I really had to take back when I got out of the relationship. And by the way, mine stalked me online for a while. He was listening to my podcast. He was on my pages. I knew he was. He was on my website. Like in the year, he was on at least 300 times on my website, rereading my articles. He even referenced my articles in an email to me when he was furious about something. So I knew he was really all over me, just smothering me all over me. But here's what I decided. If I give power to what I do day in and day out, then I'm still under their control. And I don't want this person to have one more minute of my life. So I started just to push back and take my life back and stopped. I pretended that he didn't exist. So I'm not suggesting if you're in risk, this person's harming you, that you should do that. But I also want to give you a suggestion. If they're just watching, take your life back, start to push back. Do what you would normally do if they don't are not on the face of the earth. I would say to myself, "What would you do if he's not here in the world?" I would do XYZ, and I said, "Then do it. Then just go do that." Yeah, exactly. If you need to forget they exist. I appreciate that's helpful. Yeah, somebody's talking about how the church is advising them, in a way that puts them at risk and their safety at risk. Some of you may know I'm a believer, and I know my faith has taken quite a hit around all of this. I've been rereading the Bible from a standpoint of abuse and trauma, watching what Jesus does. It's fascinating if you read it from that standpoint because Jesus ultimately loses his life. So it's really interesting watching what happens, how he manages all the political intrigue. But here's the thing that I hear about churches, and I really want to like stress you. I don't think God puts your safety at wants your safety at risk. I don't think a relationship is better and more important, more sacred than you. The Bible talks about you're made in the image of God. Yes, the marriage is supposed to be a sacrament of the union of Christ, but you're made in the image of God. I really got trapped up around that, and it caused me to be afraid of divorce. So I want to tell you that anybody who says the union is more important than you, I think they got things backwards. I really do. But just that's my 2 cents worth. So I was in group therapy with a licensed therapist who himself was a predatory personality with a sadistic cult psychopath, and I'm still obsessed with this old man and his ways. Yeah, that's hard. It's hard. When somebody gets into our mind, it's amazing how much rent they take up, how much space they take up from us. It really is hard to break this relate this. In fact, I'm having a fascinating interview this week. I don't know if did you watch Netflix series Bad Vegan with a woman named Sarma? Yeah, Sarma. And she was actually graduated from, I think, Wharton's School of Business. She'd started a new restaurant called Pure Food and Wine. I'm interviewing her tomorrow. I'm interviewing her tomorrow morning. I don't know yet. I haven't figured out when the published date's going to be, but we're going to be talking about this guy really took it's sort of like a swindler the Tinder swindler kind of a story. He really took her for a horrible number, and she ended up in prison over it. She got charged with I believe, a felony. She ended up 4 months in Rikers, I think. So anyway, we're going to be interviewing her tomorrow about what happened, what she's learned, where's she today. So kind of the take, what went wrong, what was told wrong about that story. She's got a new book out called, oh, let's see if I can pull it up. It's a great title. I love the title of the book. She did a play on words, which was fascinating. Let me see if I can find it real quick for you. I think it's called The Girl with the it's a play off The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, only it's not. It's a switch from that. It's called The Girl with the Duck Tattoo. The Girl with the Duck Tattoo, because of pure wine and food and around duck, pate, I think. I don't know if I'm saying that right. I never have had it. I don't like duck liver. But anyway, I'm interviewing her tomorrow. So it's really fascinating. Any other questions for me today? Yeah, someone else is talking about how their pastors was struggled to let them be okay with leaving a toxic relationship. I think, again, this is my 2 cents worth, and I know I'm stepping into maybe I shouldn't, but I don't think pastors should be counseling relationships or marriages. And do you guys know that it's pretty much being just found unethical for therapists to coach I'm sorry, therapists to see couples and couples therapy when somebody has a narcissistic personality disorder? That is considered now not wise, not advisable. It's actually harmful. So pastors definitely shouldn't be getting involved in something that therapists are now being urged off of because it's too dangerous. How long do they usually last in their new relationship if they get into immediately one day afterwards? Well, they're going to blow through that. Okay, couple things to remember with your partner. He's now or she's gotten better since they've abused you because they've learned on what went wrong with you. So they're going to get better with the next person. I've so I don't know. Sometimes it's really brief, but sometimes it lasts longer. It depends on how well they can snooker the person. They're very good at this. So and they're learning. That's the other scary part is they're learning that they're how to get better at all of this. Yeah. All right, you guys. This was really great conversation. I know it was heavy. So today I'm going to give you some advice. Please step back from this interview or this live with me today. Take some deep breaths. Maybe take a brief walk outside. I want you to recenter yourself. I know that you really heard a whole lot. You have a whole lot to think about if you're in one of these relationships. So really kind of like do some self-care and decompress, because we talked about a lot of tough stuff today. And I really want you to sit with yourself and know that you're okay and that you're here. Take some deep breaths and just know that you're very important. You're very worthwhile and you're worth loving and you're worth a healthy relationship. And I hope you join me next week when we talk about how to battle one in court. And thank you so much for hanging out with me today. I've really deeply appreciated it. All right, you guys take care. All the best to you. Bye bye.